Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Sven and Ben in conversation, how conservation travel can help save the earth. Today we have the absolute pleasure of hearing from the founder and co-chair of the board of Lindblad Expeditions, Sven Olaf Lindblad, and Nat Hab founder and president, Ben Bressler. But first, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Lindblad Expeditions CEO Dolf Berle. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for being here today. Dolf, I'll hand it off to you.
Kendall, thank you for the very warm introduction. Ben and Sven, it's wonderful to see you on the screen, and I'm very much looking forward to this time together. This is a weighty topic, how conservation travel can help save the earth. And personally, I think we're very fortunate to have two gentlemen today who have dedicated their lives to that very mission. And I'm very fortunate to work with them in my capacity as CEO for Lindblad Expeditions. As you may know, Natural Habitat is one of the companies that is largely owned by Lindblad Expeditions. And so we know each other, and I will do my best to bring the very best out of these wonderful gentlemen. Let me do a little bit of formal introduction. Some of you may not know everything that you probably need going into this conversation about Sven and Ben. So let me start with Sven. So Sven was born in Switzerland and traveled extensively with his dad. His dad, you may know, was the first person to bring non-scientific groups to the Galapagos and also to Antarctica, and is widely regarded as the godfather of ecotourism. For 6 years in his youth as a young man, Sven lived in East Africa, photographing elephants and wildlife and assisting filmmakers on a documentary about the destruction of African rainforests. And he had a lot of early exposure to nature and wildlife that taught him the importance of maintaining natural resources and understanding the cultural background of remote regions in the world. In 1979, he started our company, which was at that time called Special Expeditions, now called Lindblad Expeditions. And it was a very innovative travel company offering marine-focused expeditions aboard small ships. And what Lindblad has done since that time, and now decades later, is really to build off this core tenet, which is to provide travelers the opportunity to discover for themselves the natural, cultural, and historic regions of the world, and to provide thoughtful approaches that make these travels enriching, responsible, safe, fun, and memorable. And along the way, Sven has actually really has such a mission behind what he's trying to do to help save the planet, but he's very recognized in this way. And I do want to share a few of those highlights. We are getting a little bit of feedback, so please do adhere to the idea of being on mute. In 2006, Sven was actually feted in a ceremony that was hosted by His Royal Highness the Grand Duke Henri of Luxembourg, and at that point he was also had a moth from Galapagos named after him, Undulambia lindbladi, which was named in honor of the conservation work that he has done in the Galapagos. The United Nations Environmental Program also recognized Sven's accomplishments and named him to their global roll of honor. Today, Sven is a member of the General Assembly of the Charles Darwin Foundation for the Galapagos Island. He serves on the board of Safina Center and on the board of trustees of RARE. He's a founding ocean elder for the nonprofit organization Olding Elders, which brings together global leaders to pursue the protection of the ocean's habitat and wildlife. And he serves on the board of advisors for Pristine Seas. Everyone, please welcome Sven. Sven, hello, and how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you. Looking forward to the conversation.
It's going to be great. And let me do a few honors with regard to Ben. Ben is a bit younger, and he started his company in 1985. But it's a wonderful story where Ben, who grew up in New Jersey and was a very accomplished soccer player and skier, and becomes a teacher, but he has a life-changing experience when he is approached by the International Fund for Animal Welfare, who was looking for a young and adventurous company and person to help them develop a seal watching tourism industry replacement, because there had been a lot of seal hunting and baby carp seal hunting in eastern Canada, and they were looking for alternatives to that. Ben got going with that, but since that time, in 35 years, has grown Nat Hab to become a global leader in nature travel, and is offering life-enhancing adventures to the world's most wondrous wild places. He himself has gone to all reaches of the world, and his the moniker for the company is the world's greatest nature expeditions. And his ambition, personally, as I understand it, is to change the way that people think about travel, from large consumptive groups to small, more personal, intimate experiences that serve the areas they visit and also preserve the planet. So in so many ways, we have kindred spirits here with Sven and Ben, and it's just a privilege for me to be with both of you. We do have some questions that we've organized, but before we do that, I'd like to come back to you, Sven. And there's a very interesting quote that shows up on the website for Lindblad, and it reads like this. And I wonder if you could just share, where this comes from in you. You describe the company as being a conduit to exhilaration, to the feeling you get when you see something wild and unexpected, or rare and beautiful. Maybe you could share a little bit with the audience about why you think that is something that's important and how it ties to your passion for the planet.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the planet, as we all know, is challenged on a multitude of fronts. We read about it every day in our news feeds. We see documentaries about it. We're told about it in a number of ways. By the way, does anybody know what this feedback is?
Yeah, we're getting feedback from the audience. It is not on my end, Sven. Perhaps not on Ben's. So perhaps one of our organizers can help us with that.
Yeah. Everyone appears to be muted. Let me try muting everyone. Just real quick.
Yeah, it's almost as if we're tapping into a phone call from people.
I think that solved the problem. I muted Sven, and I'm not hearing the feedback now.
Maybe there's a microphone going there, but not to worry. Sven, I think we had gotten some insight from you there. I'm not sure if you would like to go further, or I'll just go quickly to Ben and we can come back to you in a moment. Yeah, let me do that because Sven seems to be on mute. And so related to Sven's answer for that quote, Ben, one of the things I've noticed as I research, more about what you're doing is you talk about how your company caters to a certain kind of guest, one who shares the love for the planet and who is seeking life-affirming experiences, one who considers nature home, and also a company that is trying to help people go to where they feel most connected, most inspired, and most alive. Could you just talk, I get tingles when I read that. Could you just talk a little bit about why that's something that shows up in your life's work?
Well, it's important. It's important that we think about nature. For many people, especially think about it during COVID. One of the things that saved us these last 18 months is just going outside and maybe looking at the flowers or hearing the birds or going for a short walk. Getting out in nature, whether it is on a full safari or up to the Arctic or Antarctica, or just going around the block and checking out the birds, it's important. It changes the way we think. I can tell you it's been a tough 18 months being in the industry, running a company during this time. And every day I make sure that I walk around the block at least, and it changes the way you think. It has a biological impact on you. So getting out there is important, but it's not only important for each individual, of course, it's important for the planet. As we'll talk about the benefits that local people and conservation feel from conservation travel or travel into these wild areas.
Well, Ben, it's an excellent point, and let's unmute Sven because I think he'll have something to say about this specific question. So let's go to a specific question about that topic, Ben. And so the question is, how does travel play a part in conserving our planet? Clearly, there's lots of things that one can do to do that, and you are exemplars of that. But how does travel itself play a part in conserving our planet? Sven, do you want to opine on that for us?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's partially related to what I was trying to answer before. Is that when we are exposed to wonder, when we are exhilarated by experiences, it just changes the relationship of how we think about those places. And at the end of the day, we're just bombarded with intellectual reasons to be better stewards of our planet. But once you're out there, once you've seen an iceberg the size of the Empire State Building, when you've seen a herd of wildebeest crossing the plains of the Serengeti, you all of a sudden have a very different relationship with the subject, because all of a sudden it's embedded in you. You are emotionally connected. And as such, the relationship between the intellectual side of your brain and the emotional, heartfelt side of you connects. And when that connection is made, you become, I believe, way more powerful in terms of your considerations.
Ben, do you want to add to that in terms of how travel plays a part in conserving the planet?
Oh, yeah, well, I think Sven's exactly right. I mean, whether we like to think of it this way or not, being a little bit older, we're influencers, not the selfie, Instagram, Facebook type, but we're influencers. What we do is we take people and we allow nature to influence the way they think. And for example, on our polar bear trips, you go up and see a polar bear wandering across the tundra in the wild, and the wind's whipping, and this polar bear's going across, and you're 20 feet from it, or it may come up to you and lift its paws on your rover, and you're looking at it just from feet away. You can't go home and say, yeah, no, those aren't important. We don't need to protect them. But you go home and you think, this is something that's important. Those things have to continue to exist. And maybe you'll change the way you go about your day. Maybe you'll purchase an electric car, or maybe ride your bike a little more, maybe you'll recycle or compost, or maybe you'll vote for the environment, and think about climate change in the actions you take. But the more people that can think about nature as an integral part of the way we live and of the planet, and its protection is important, the better.
I'd like to ask you both, was there a specific moment in your lives where this realization really came home for you that you can remember from your youth? Or please,
so when I went to East Africa for a summer in 1969 and wound up staying the next 7 years, it was in my early 20s, what I was doing, I was hanging around scientists, game wardens, people like that, and not doing the things that a normal 20-year-old would do, going out to clubs and that type of thing. And it was a very fortunate experience, because I had so many mentors that influenced my thinking, and I became very well aware of the importance of natural systems and what they meant for us. It was more than just an aesthetic issue. It was an essential issue. Nature thriving was essential to our well-being as human beings, and that was clear to me in my early 20s. But one day I went out and I was working in Tsavo East National Park. It had the largest population of black rhino and elephant in all of Africa, 5,000 square miles. And one day I decided just to go out for the fun of it to see how many rhino I could find, and I found 58 individuals. That's an awesome number, and I was very chuffed and very pleased with myself. That was fun. It was normal to see 10 or 12, so it was an area that really paid off on the fact that it had this largest population. 10 years later, I went there and spent a week with a friend of mine, and I did not see one. And I think it was at that moment I became a conservationist, or a serious conservationist, because I said to myself, this is way, way too much power that we have as human beings to essentially wipe out a creature in an area of its greatest population within a decade. And that profoundly affected me. And everything I've done since is connected with that single experience.
And I can tell, just knowing you, Sven, just the way you describe it and your voice, just how deeply that resonates with you even today.
It does. It was an unbelievable thing to realize at a young age.
Yes, well, on behalf of all of us, thank you for taking up the mantle to do something about it, as opposed to letting that opportunity go by. Ben, how about you? Is there a moment that really was the moment for you?
Yeah, well, first I have to point out that when Sven was 20, running around the savannah, I was 7. All right, I needed to point that out. I was going to kindergarten or whatever I was going to. I guess I've stayed back a bit. But okay, there's a great example. Sven's going to Savo and seeing what he saw and falling in love with nature. That's an example of what we do every day. We went to these places, we fell in love, and we took action. And the same thing happens to our guests. So it's not just our guests who this happens to. For me, it was the baby harp seals in the east coast of Canada in the late 80s, where I flew out by helicopter out to see these baby harp seals. And if you can imagine, north of Halifax and north of Prince Edward Island are these small islands in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and you fly out there, and as far as you could see are ice floes with hundreds of thousands of mother seals and their pups. And we land our helicopters and we waddle about in our big orange suits, and I'm there with a bunch of guests who had paid money to go see these seals. And it was just absolutely incredible for me to see. But more incredible than that was getting in the helicopter with these folks afterwards. And they had tears in their eyes. There were two Canadian women, sisters in their 70s, who had tears in their eyes from what they had seen. And I realized at that moment, yeah, I was so excited about what I saw, but I was more excited about the excitement that these folks saw. And that's where that's where my satisfaction comes in, is watching folks connect with nature.
Thank you for that. Yeah, these moments that matter in this way are so seminal. And I think in my own life, like when a monarch butterfly in Massachusetts landed on my daughter's hand, and she was 7 years old, and that created a whole window into the world of milkweed and habitat that need to be preserved, and the fact that the monarchs, have such a remarkable journey from Mexico that I know Nat Hab, teaches people about. So we're all stewards of that in each other, right? And for the next generation. But when we started this conversation, Ben, one of the things that you said was that these are sort of critical times and sort of remarkable times. And I think the reference there really is to what's going on related to COVID. And so a question that relates to that, and why don't I start with you, Sven? Do we envisage, or do you envisage the rebirth of travel looking differently? People are saying that sustainable travel is likely to emerge as bolder than before. Do you agree with that? And what are your thoughts about travel post-pandemic? Oops, I think you're on mute there, Sven.
Yeah, this is not empirical in terms of an answer, but it's a sense. My sense is that the idea of being in wild places has increased. The interest in being in wild places has increased as a consequence of COVID. I think a lot of people during COVID took those walks that Ben referred to, spent more time with their families, adjusted their lives in a multitude of ways. And I think there was a premium on getting away from crowds and getting into open spaces, I think a lot of people took advantage of that because they needed to in order to feel sane, in order to get through the day. And as a consequence of that, I think that there is definitely an enhanced interest in wild places. I hope I'm right, but I hope I'm right from the perspective of not just greater interest in going to these places, but greater interest in being concerned about the importance of these places. Because there is no question that we are very much out of balance with natural systems. I mean, that, as far as I'm concerned, is a fact. That's the reason I can say that is because I spend a lot of time hanging out with scientists who study this on a regular basis. And it's sad, but it also represents an opportunity. The human being is an ingenious sort of creature potentially, and we can change this trajectory. We have the knowledge, we know what we need to do. We just have to figure out how to go and do it. And if we rebalance this relationship between ourselves and natural systems, our children and our grandchildren will be the beneficiaries in profound ways. And I believe it's our responsibility, frankly, to give them a future that has healthy natural systems.
Thank you. And Ben, your thoughts on the rebirth of travel, and will it look different going forward than it may have been before the pandemic? Oh, you're on mute as well.
I do think it'll look slightly different, and I think right now people are so excited. People, they want to go to Africa. They maybe have wanted to go to Africa for years, and now they don't just want to go to Botswana. They want to go to Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Uganda. You know, they want to put work on hold and go for 30 days. You know, so everybody's so excited to get back out there. I made a promise to myself that when a friend calls me to ask me to do something, I'm always going to say yes, no matter what, for the rest of my life. I'm never going to decline an opportunity to do something. And I think people are thinking that way. Now, I'm sure that will wane to some degree and people will start being a little more reasonable. But one thing that has happened is people are when they do book their trip, they're thinking a little bigger, right? Going a little farther afield. Even for us, you know, I mean, we social distance, that's what we do. We've been doing that for 35 years in our trips. We socially distance. But now people are going just a little bit farther.
You know, I think what's so interesting about having the two of you here together is that you're both gentlemen who had this personal passion, but then you decided to start companies that could be a force for change in this way. And so what I'd like to ask you is, from a company standpoint, for people who run companies, you know, what do you think companies like ours should be doing to do even more than they've done so far? And Sven, this is maybe, I think, a good opportunity to ask you, maybe you could just describe some of the work that you've been doing in recent decades in order to be a company that is responsible and makes a difference, but then also how you think about the future for a company like Lindblad.
Yeah, well, I think that once you're aware of something that means a lot to you, it's incumbent to find ways to manifest that, right? In my case, it was starting a company. I actually, when I started this company, I didn't think about it really as a business. I thought about it more as a vehicle to bring joy to people and wonder to people, and then create this sort of army of people, or help create an army of people that cared about the stuff that I cared about at that point in my life. And I found a variety of ways to do this, and I think everybody benefits. I think that our guests benefit as a consequence of that sentiment. We benefit as a company, and the places that we go to benefit because we find creative ways to create support structures. And we do that in a variety of different ways. We have a fund together with National Geographic. We raise a couple of $1 million a year to support various activities on the ground at different places. We use our ships at times for convenings. And in 2008, I had the privilege of being able to organize a voyage to the Arctic it was called a Summit for Climate Change. And what our thesis there was to bring different segments of society together: politicians, scientists, community leaders, NGO leaders, and bring them together to see if religious leaders, to see if they could find a common ground and not act in silos and work across sectors. And so, for example, we were able to get Jimmy Carter, Ted Turner, Madeleine Albright, Larry Page, the CEO of Monsanto, the head of the Catholic, the head of the Catholic bishops, a whole variety of people, Cecile Richards, and a whole variety of people to sort of discuss how they could interact across sectors to make climate more of a central issue. Unfortunately, that was in July of 2008, and we all know what happened in September of 2008. The economy crashed, and the whole subject of climate change disappeared for years and years and years. But there are so many different ways that we can engage with people to move the ball in the right direction. And I could go on and on about that, but we don't have time for that. But
well, I think there is one interesting thing that I think our folks who are listening might be interested in. So you made the decision to have Lindblad Expeditions be carbon neutral as a company some years ago, and maybe you could just describe how we do that, and I think and why and how we do that, because it's an interesting model that other companies potentially could follow.
Well, that, you know, I had rejected the idea of offsets as a mechanism to help with the issue of climate change way back. My scientific friends who were sort of deeply embedded in this issue talked me out of doing this like a decade ago, or even more now, 13, 14 years ago, when I thought it might be something that we should do at that time. But then I was inspired by Cort Wieland and Ben and Nat Hab, who really convinced me that the landscape of offsets, which is the mechanism we use in order to be carbon neutral, had changed rather dramatically in terms of its credibility. And so we did a bit of research, worked very closely with Cort specifically, and decided that we would offset everything in our organization: our ships, our travel, crew travel, personnel travel, offices, everything we could identify. And we feel it was a very good thing to do. It's not inexpensive, but it's a really good thing to do. And I really thank Natural Habitat and Ben and Cort for really having gotten me off the track that I was on previously, and accepting the idea that this was really an important thing to do.
There you go. And I've just finished meetings last week with our chief financial officer, who actually has the tally for the number of tons of carbon that were utilized in the pursuit of what we do as a business. And we're actively looking at all the various offsets, and sometimes those relate to planting trees, at other times it has to do with places all across the world, right, that offer opportunities for carbon offsets, and we make a regular study of that. Ben, I think that there are several firsts in the travel industry that Nat Hab can claim when it has to do with this topic of being environmentally sustainable and a leader in this way. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your journey that way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, there's a great example. I mentioned we're influencers. We're not just influencers of the guests that come on our trips. We're influencers of the larger companies. When we became the world's first 100% carbon neutral travel company in 2007, it's meaningless. The amount of tons that we offset back then, and even still, is meaningless. It's important to do because we can influence a larger company like Sven and Lindblad Expeditions. Now, we were the only company doing it, and now you have Marriott offset, and you've got United Airlines. When you buy a ticket online, you have the option to offset your flights. So it's really exciting. So the influence goes beyond just travelers, goes to other companies, because let's face it, we can't do this alone. This whole thing about changing the way people think about travel, I'm going to have to admit that the 7 point whatever billion people on the planet are not going to just travel with Natural Habitat. My hope is that we can, I don't think we have space, there's an inventory problem. My hope is that the other companies look at what we do and say, hey, that's something. And whether they're into it or not, they're going to say, well, there's an economic potential here. There's an opportunity for us to do something that resonates with people. And so it just comes from demand. If we can show people that this is important and people can demand it, then they can get other larger companies on board. And that's what's been happening.
And Ben, I've had a chance to visit your offices in Boulder. Tell me about how this very thing is influential in the way that you recruit members of your team.
Well, I think, first of all, Boulder, Colorado is filled with, hippies that want to save the planet, right? So that's great. But I think people are attracted to what we do because of our purpose. If you start with why we do something, start with our purpose, and that is conservation through exploration. And everything we do has to follow that. And people are attracted to our company, whether it's the field staff, who are clearly in it for the environment and for wildlife and protecting the planet, and our office staff, who say, that's a company I want to be a part of, where where every t-shirt is organic cotton or every backpack is made of recycled materials and so on and so on. And you have to think top to bottom through everything. And when you start to do that, you start to attract people who share your why, share the purpose. And you'll see that around our office with people walking barefoot and a ton of dogs.
There you go. Well, we're getting a little closer to the end of our formal questions, and I know that there will be a number of questions coming in from our audience, but Sven, you're one of the most traveled people in the world, and you've been to more remote places than anyone I've ever met, and I think that most people would have met. Where do you think you would like to go next in terms of finding your own inspiration or seeing something that you may have seen a long time ago, and then maybe you could share the why, because I think we all feel like we can learn something from you in this way.
Yeah, well, I certainly have had the privilege of traveling to a lot of places in my life. Right now, for the last many years, I've been completely obsessed about, with my spare time, to go underwater. I'm an avid scuba diver. I find being underwater is peaceful and exciting and full of wonder. So I'm constantly in search of where are the next areas that I'd like to discover from an undersea perspective. And in the last many years, I found that whether you're snorkeling or scuba diving, that I spend a lot of time in French Polynesia. I've been there for the last 5 years. I'm about to go back in October, I think, to try and finalize a business project. And then next year, I'm going to explore much of the Pacific, because I think that is one of the places where you are going to find the most healthy reef systems, the most vibrant underwater communities, and I want to try and identify and see as many of them as I possibly can in the next number of years. Because most people see the ocean, the largest single body of anything on Earth, from the surface, and it's largely unexplored, believe it or not, below the surface. And there's so much to see, so much to discover, so much wonder to be had, and so much concern, because we are harming our oceans in significant ways. And in order to stop that, we need to get more and more people into the water, under the ocean surface, exploring, and that will make a big difference over time.
And I have to ask you, Sven, now that space travel for tourists is, coming on strong, at least for a small number of people, is that something that you would like to do, or are you going to plumb the undersea depths as an alternative?
Honestly, I'm much more interested in what is below the ocean surface than I am, from a personal point of view, than I am going to space. I don't know, one day I might. One of my fellow ocean elders is Richard Branson, and he and I have talked about his space program on numerous occasions, and I commend him for making the effort to do that, and I'm sure a lot of people will enjoy it. Spending $350,000 right now for a 10-minute experience, I'm not sure that's what I'm going to do, but one day maybe.
There we go. Well, I think you can buy a pretty good yellow submarine for not much more than that. And so thank you for that input. And Ben, how about you? You also have been to many places, and some of them you know very well. You and I had a talk yesterday about Churchill up there in Canada, which is so famous for polar bears and everything you do up there. But what do you have on your list in terms of places to go next and places you're most interested in?
Well, it's definitely not space, I can tell you that. But I'm heading up to Churchill in October, and I can't tell you how excited I am that Canada's open to us and that we're going to get back out there. It's been, we missed last year, and it's such an important thing for us and for our guests and for the local community. For me personally, I keep talking about getting back to see mountain gorillas, because there's just probably no greater single example of protecting a species through carefully orchestrated travel than the mountain gorillas of Central Africa, of Uganda, Rwanda. And I would really love to go back there. I went there first on my honeymoon in 1990, and then took my 15-year-old son there 10 years ago, and I would love to go back. So I think that's top of my list.
Thank you both for those very interesting answers. And we, in a moment, I'm going to go over to Kendall, who will open the floodgates in terms of incoming questions. But there was one that arrived even before the start of this conversation, and I'm going to read it, and I'm interested in both of your thoughts. So one of our listeners writes in and asks, or says, when I learn about all the disastrous environmental events occurring all over the planet, I can hardly bear it. I do what I can, but individual efforts seem so insignificant. How do you maintain optimism and hope in the face of so much destruction and loss? Who would like to go first? Sven?
Sure. Well, here, it's an interesting, very interesting question, because obviously if you think in terms of what you as an individual can do in isolation, it's obviously not going to get the job done. But if we all think in terms of anything we can do as individuals combined with what other people can do as individuals, in aggregate it becomes really, really important. And the fact of, and in terms of optimism, we cannot live without optimism. We have to believe that we can correct things that are wrong. And I said, well, we're constantly, there's this term, constantly seeking a better union or moving towards a better union. We don't solve things in a generation or two or three necessarily, but we hopefully migrate them to a better place. The reality is with natural systems, we've neglected it for so long that the urgency, the fierce urgency of now is critical, because this is going to hurt us a great deal if we don't, figure this out soon. And so anyone out there with an idea or a thought or anything that contributes to that migration to get to a better place is doing something worthwhile. And as a consequence of imagining that others are too, you deserve to be optimistic.
Thank you, Sven. Ben, how do you maintain optimism and hope in the face of all this destruction and loss?
Well, it really is a great question, but for us, we're in this every day, and we've got nose to the grindstone working on it. So quite honestly, there's not enough time for us in the day to think about everything that's going wrong, because we're working on getting people out there, about supporting local communities, which of course is huge, getting money into the hands of locals that incentivizes them to protect their local habitats and wildlife. This is something that we work on every day, and we see so many guests traveling, and we see it on a much more aerial level. I think to run a business, you have to be a bit of an optimist. If we were pessimists, we would have given up a long time ago.
Thank you. And before we go to the Q&A, I just want to say personally what a privilege it is for me to work with both of you. I have been in a number of different industries over time, but now a little bit later in life, I'm returning to what I call home, because I think both of you know that my father was an environmentalist. That's what's on his tombstone, and he was the head of National Audubon when I was a boy, and commissioner to the environment for New York State. And so I spent a lot of time with him in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, and working on or helping think through things that were very interesting in the Adirondacks, which was a little closer to home at that point. So thank you for allowing me to be part of your journeys, and for the privilege of all being able to work together. Kendall, let's go back to you now and see what sort of questions are coming in from our audience.
Great, thank you so much, gentlemen. Before we start the Q&A, I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question today, you can submit that in your control panel under the questions field. Okay, I know we talked about this a bit just a moment ago, but there's so much curiosity about carbon footprint and what it means to be carbon neutral. And a lot of curiosity actually, Ben, about what we do, who we invest in order to be carbon neutral.
Well, on a big picture, I think that if you want the full details, we'll have to call Court in and have him give the details. But just to give an example, if we were to take a group to Botswana and fly around and use our trucks, we might give off X amount of greenhouse gases through our either hotels or cooking or our vehicles and so on. And let's whatever that number is, we would then go and remove that amount elsewhere. And one way, just as an example, might be there might be a diesel generator in the university in San Jose, Costa Rica. We might replace that diesel generator with solar panels, and that would be the same amount of greenhouse gases that we would emit. There's a lot of combination of things. Some of them may be planting trees, but you've got to discount a little bit of that because there's trees can die. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, but that's essentially how it works. And for Nat Hab, we offset everybody's flights from their home all the way to the trip and the whole trip and the flight home, and then all of the operations that Lindblad and Nat Hab do in our offices too. We offset that as well.
Sven, do you have any insight you want to provide?
Well, the only insight I'd provide is that offsetting, which is the mechanism, which is basically, as Ben said, investing in something that essentially diminishes the carbon footprint of that activity, or in certain, so that has amongst certain circles a negative, is viewed negatively. It's kind of like paying for your sins, and in fact, it is to some degree, but it is a mechanism, and it is a positive one, only if things are invested in that would not have flourished or would not have come to the table otherwise, right? And so you're actually creating opportunities. So, for example, cook stoves, so that women in Africa don't have to go and collect and spend most of their day carrying wood home to create charcoal in order to cook with. So you and if you can accelerate the use of cook stoves that are way more efficient and do not require the use of charcoal, you are doing so much that's valuable in terms of carbon, but at the same time in terms of the health of individuals in whatever part of the world that those apply. So, at the end of the day, the holy grail is obviously to stop emitting carbon. But we are, like, for example, we have ships. We are not going to stop emitting carbon. We are going to lessen it with new technologies. But until such point as we can get to zero emissions, offsetting, I believe, is a very positive interim activity, if you will, or interim strategy.
If I might add to that, I think, you hit the nail on the head, Sven, is that we have to keep innovating and do more that can reduce. Yes, it's great to offset, but reducing is better. At Nat Hab, we created the world's first hybrid safari truck. Now, we took a hybrid Toyota Highlander and sawed off the roof and jacked it up and did all this stuff, and it was great. I mean, the vehicle was a piece of junk, right? So in that regard, it didn't work. But it was in an influencer. So now there are companies building electric safari vehicles in Africa, and we're working on commissioning our first ones right now. So it's just the stepping stones that you can push forward. We last year, or I'm sorry, the year before, ran the world's first zero waste trip, zero waste adventure for 14 people for a week in Yellowstone. And the waste that we collected that we couldn't recycle or compost fit in a mason jar. So that's a whole week, 15 people, the total waste fit in a mason jar. And that took a lot of work, and it's not repeatable in the same way, but it taught us a lot that we now have reduced elsewhere as we run trips.
And one of the things that I'll just offer too is that there's a tremendous amount of interest on the part of all the employees who work with us to learn more and more about how they can be more conscious of this in their own lives. And so we've recently developed a program in working with RARE, and that has to do with plant-based diets and also very simple things like reducing the number of plastic containers that are not so disposable but are not reused. And so I'm excited about what's coming up within the organization for all of us in terms of the interest, particularly from the younger generation.
Mm-hmm. All right, so next question here, sort of on the same topic. There's someone who is interested in learning how we're able to hold suppliers and partners accountable for sustainability measures, for example, single-use plastics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple of things. So we eliminated single-use plastics on our ship years ago. Totally unnecessary, a real problem. I mean, there's so much plastic in the ocean. It drives me absolutely up the wall and down the other side. Thankfully, there are lots of strides being made all over the world in terms of reducing single-use plastics, which is really, really necessary because the ocean is a garbage dump in many ways in many parts of the world, and it's a huge, huge, huge issue. And by virtue of the fact that we have committed to eliminate single-use plastics, we put a lot of pressure on suppliers to say we're really going to have a lesser interest in your product if you send it, package it, deliver it with plastic. And you know, to the degree that your business matters to a supplier, it can absolutely have an effect. It certainly gets them thinking about it. And if you can get them to sort of innovate and begin to, you know, find creative ways to not use plastic, that's really, really a form of influence which matters a great deal.
So there was a lot of interest in your thoughts on, I'll summarize it as the want to travel to these remote places with the need to protect these places. So, you know, what are your thoughts on traveling to these remote places and you know, bringing these travelers there when they're otherwise it would have been pretty quiet?
Ben, why don't you go first? And I have a very strong opinion about this as well.
Well, travel really is a double-edged sword, quite honestly. I mean, there's no question that would these places be best off without visitors coming out? They would be. It's just not realistic. Would the Serengeti be wonderful if no humans ever visited there? Yeah, it would be great, but it's not realistic because we are members of this planet, and you know, it would be farmland. It would become farmland if we couldn't monetize that and help people survive. And help protect the wildlife. Yeah, it would be best if we didn't go, of course, but it's important that when we do go, that we do so very carefully with two things in mind. You know, tread lightly, of course, but conservation travel is much bigger than just tread lightly and be careful and don't use single-use plastic and so on. It's much bigger than that. It is involving the local communities and getting money into the hands of those folks so that they feel a part of the protection of these places.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that just that I always say to people that if the Serengeti were not a national park where people came to visit, it would become a cornfield. And that's the reality of economics in different parts of the world. And that's absolutely true because that land would have to justify itself in some fashion for human use. I wish that weren't the case, that all land had to be justified for human use, but it often is. The reality of life is it often is the case. But when you think of something like whales and the fact that, you know, there have been lots of restrictions on the killing of whales around the world, whale populations have come back in significant numbers. The California gray whale is at record numbers, pre-whaling numbers. The humpback whale is coming back very, very strongly. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that people were interested in viewing whales. There were lots of businesses that came up that made that possible. And you wound up with a tremendously large voice for the protection of whales that kept going, you know, kept getting louder and louder and louder, and made it impossible to in certain areas to continue hunting whales without a strong public reaction. So there's an example. Does occasionally a whaling boat get too close and disrupt a whale's daily behavior? Absolutely. Is that unfortunate? Yes. But if those whaling boats weren't out there, we'd be killing whales. Absolutely. We would be driving them to extinction, in my view. There would be nothing to prevent that from happening. So there aren't a lot of perfect solutions in the world around anything. And tourism, when it's done well and with purpose, can be a great, meaningful contributor to maintaining wildlife and wilderness.
All right, well, we're getting really close to the top of the hour, and we've had so many questions today, so I do apologize to our audience if we didn't get to your question, but I'm going to end on this one final note. How can we be sustainable and still make travel affordable for those who would love to experience seeing animals in nature, who maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a Nat Hab or Lindblad trip?
Yeah, I'll take this. And there's a lot of different companies with a lot of different styles of travel. And I think that it's very important to select a company that shares your ethos first and foremost, the purpose. Why does that company exist? What's their mission, right? And not only will you be able to find a company that they themselves suit your needs, but you're going to travel with co-travelers who are like-minded like you. If you've got one extra day, if you're about nature and you're about conservation and protecting the planet, and there's one empty day, are the other guests going to go to a curio shop and buy curios all day? Or are they going to, maybe go track one more rhino or take a walk in the woods? And you want to share it with people who share your interests and your ethos. There are a lot of companies at different price points who do it, who are thinking the way we're thinking.
Yeah. Sven, do you have any thoughts?
Well, just that the reality is that if you, at least in our business, if you want to operate small, relatively small ships, in our case, our 10 ships are an average of about 100 guests. That's an expensive proposition, and there's no way around that. And I kind of look at it in many ways like you're going out on your 20th anniversary and you're going to get a bottle of wine, and there's one you really like and it's $50, and there's one that's exceptional and it's $70. You're not making a $70 decision, you're making a $20 decision because you were going to get some bottle of wine anyway. And I actually, from a value perspective, I think the energy that we put into our efforts, the kind of ships that we acquire and build that are the right size, because if they're too big, your experience is going to diminish dramatically. The quality of personnel, et cetera, it all adds up to not being inexpensive. But I do believe, and I can look you in the eye and say, I believe there's a lot of value contained in what we provide you with. I wish we could make it less expensive, but it just isn't realistic.
Well, we've had a lot of comments from past travelers throughout this entire presentation, just reliving wonderful moments they've had with Nat Hab and Lindblad. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. It is the top of the hour, so I'm going to close the Q&A and I'm going to hand it back over to all of you for closing comments. And let's start with Dolf.
Sure. Well, my thanks again for being able to work with you gentlemen. And Sven, as you were talking about just how to think about sustainability and next generations, I was just reminded of this wonderful quote from Baba Dioum from Senegal, the forestry engineer. And he said, this is something that's captured actually, I think it's in the aquarium in Chicago, but it's in the end, we'll only save what we love. And we'll love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we're taught. And so, so they're teaching that goes along with this, and the way that our industry can teach so many people about what is so special, and not only for the planet, but also for people deep in their souls, it's just a privilege to be part of that mission. And so my thanks for being able to join with you today and also to be colleagues with you. That's all I wanted to share. And of course, thanks for everyone joining today. Ben, let's come over to you maybe next.
Yeah, well, thank you all for joining. It really is always a pleasure to get to chat with our guests, and so many of you signed on today. And I want to thank you, Dolf. It's been a pleasure these last months spending time with you, going snowshoeing, getting attacked by that marmot. Whatever, we were safe. And Sven, thank you for your time and over these past 6 years and the many years that we've known each other, for being such a great influence on me and helping challenge me to do conservation travel better and better. Lastly, I do want to thank World Wildlife Fund, who's been just such a great, also a great influence, because we do a lot of work with them, and I just am so pleased that to have them help train our guides has been really wonderful.
Sven,
Yeah, well,
final word.
Yeah, well, Ben, it's been so much fun knowing you over the years as part of the Adventure Collection, which you can Google that Ben and I have been a part of for, I don't know how long now, Ben. I started in 2001, I think, which was an aggregation of companies that are specialists in their field, and obviously Natural Habitat was one of those companies that really was worthy of belonging to that group, and there's like 9 others, and it's been fun over the years, and now it's really been fun to get more closely involved with Natural Habitat. Great company, great people, great ethos. But listen, all of you who joined us, I really appreciate it. The fact that you would spend your Monday afternoon or whatever time zone you're in. For me, I'm in Hawaii at the moment, so it's in the morning. But thanks for joining us. And just remember, everybody can contribute to this issue of getting us in our natural world in better balance. And don't ever believe that your efforts are unimportant, because they're not. And Dolf, thanks for moderating this, and thanks for agreeing to be CEO of Lindblad Expeditions. Well, I am very happy now being co-chairman. I have a very different role now, and it gives me a certain amount of peace, which I really appreciate.
It's just amazing to work with people that you admire and care about. So thank you for that. Kendall, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. This was wonderful. I appreciate your time today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Bye.